There is something that nobody prepares you for. You work towards success for years. You build the career, you hit the goals. You arrive at the version of the life that was supposed to make everything feel worth it. And then you discover something uncomfortable. Success doesn't automatically make you happy. Not the way you expected. Not the way the old structure of your effort assumed it would. And that gap between the success and the happiness is one of the most disorienting things a man can feel. If you felt that gap, if you wondered why reaching what you worked for still left something missing, stay with me in this video. Hit like if it already sounds familiar, and subscribe if you want to keep having the kind of conversations that actually go somewhere. Now let's talk about why this happens. I want to start with something most men never say out loud. At some point, usually in the 40s and in the 50s, sometimes earlier, sometimes later, a man looks at his life and feels a very specific kind of confusion. Not failure confusion, success confusion. The career is real, the income is real, the life he built is, by any external measure, a success. And yet, the happiness he assumed would come with it feels thinner than expected, more occasional, more dependent on distraction, less like a sustained state, more like a weather pattern that passes through and then leaves. And the confusion comes from the fact that everything points to satisfaction. But satisfaction and happiness turn out not to be the same thing. I think most men have felt this at some point, and almost none of them talk about it. Because success is supposed to be the answer. That's the deal that was made. Work hard enough, achieve enough, build enough, and happiness follows. That's the implicit promise that most men absorbed before they were old enough to question it. And when the promise doesn't fully deliver, when the happiness arrives in smaller doses than expected and doesn't quite sustain the way it was supposed to, the first response is to usually assume the problem is with the success. Not enough of it yet, not the right kind, not the specific version that will finally tip the scale. So men keep pursuing, and some of them spend decades in that loop. More success, less happiness, more pursuit, without ever asking whether the promise itself was flawed. But here is the strange part. The men who achieve the most are often not the happiest. That sounds wrong. It sounds ungrateful. It goes against everything that culture teaches. But most men misunderstand why. Because the problem isn't achievement itself. The problem is what achievement was being asked to do. Most men use success as a proxy for self-worth, for the feeling of the internal peace that comes from knowing who you are. In some fundamental sense, that is actually okay. Because success can produce that feeling, at least temporarily, reliably, again and again. It can, but only again temporarily, because self-worth built on achievement is always conditional. It depends on the success continuing, on the next achievement arriving, on the performance being sustained. And a happiness that is conditional on performance is not really happiness. It's relief. The relief of having met the standard for now, until the next standard arrives. And the reliefs, however real they feel in the moment, they're not the same thing as peace. So here is something I want to sit with for a moment. There is a specific kind of unhappiness that only successful people know. The unhappiness of the man who did everything right and still feel like something is missing. Not failure, not luck, not regret. The quiet, persistent sense that the life is complete and something in it is still hollow. And what makes this particular unhappiness so hard to address is that he has no obvious cause. Nothing to fix, nothing to change, no specific deficit to address. Just the felt absence of something that was supposed to be there and isn't. And this is where things become interesting, because that absence, that specific hollow quality, is usually pointing at the same thing, not a missing achievement, a missing connection. The connection between what a man does and what he genuinely values, between the life he has built and the person he actually is, between the version of himself that shows up for work and the version that exists in the private interior, the one with actual preferences and genuine desires and things he cares about that have nothing to do with how they look from the outside. When those are aligned, the happiness has somewhere to live. When they're not, when the life is built on external metrics while the interior is left unattended, success fills the house. But nobody is home. And so something changes after 40 and after 50 in how a man relates to his own happiness. When you're young, happiness is mostly anticipated. It lives in the future. It's attached to the next arrival, to the next milestone. The next version of a life where things will finally feel right. But after 40 and after 50, anticipation starts to thin. The future has arrived enough times to reveal itself for what it is. Not a permanent address for happiness. Just another present moment that becomes the past. And in that thinning, in the loosening of the belief that the right achievement will finally deliver the right feeling, something else becomes possible. A different relationship with the present. The recognition that if happiness exists at all, if a genuine, sustained sense of being okay is possible, it doesn't live in the destination. It lives in the quality of attention brought to whether you already are. Most men take years to arrive at this, and even then, they find it difficult to practice. They find it difficult to practice because the whole first half of life was organized around postponing the presence in service of a better future. And revising that orientation is not a decision, it's a practice. It's something that you have to practice. And here is something I've come to believe about happiness. The kind that lasts, the kind that doesn't depend on conditions to be met, is not produced by success. It's produced by integrity. Not moral integrity, though that matters. Psychological integrity. The experience of your outer life and your inner life being in a reasonable alignment, of some choices you make reflecting the values you actually hold, of the way you show up in the world, matching at least somewhat, at least in the direction that matter, matching the person you actually are. When that alignment exists, even imperfectly, something settles. Not the excitement of success, not the relief of achievement. Something quieter and more durable. The sense that the life being lived belongs to the man living it. That when he looks at the day, the choices made, the people engaged with, the version of himself he brought to it, he can recognize himself in it. That recognition, small as it sounds, is closer to happiness than most achievements ever get. And most men spend their entire careers building towards something external, while the thing that actually would make them happy was the interior adjustment all along. So I want to ask you something, and I'd really like to know that answer. So write it in the comments, if you're willing. Think about the moments in your life when you felt genuinely happy, not relieved, not satisfied, not even proud. Genuinely, quietly happy. What was happening? Where were you? What were you doing? Who were you with? Because for most men, when they actually sit with that question, when they go back to the specific moment rather than the abstract idea of happiness, the answer is almost never about success. It's usually something much simpler. A conversation that went somewhere real. An afternoon with no agenda. Just walking with your dog. A moment of connection with someone who knows you. Something made with your hands. A walk. Exactly like this one. The happiness was there. It's always been there. In the things that don't make it into a résumé. In the ordinary moments that don't get optimized or measured. Like this video that is not optimized. It's just me talking to my phone. And the question worth sitting with is this. How much of your daily life is actually designed around those things? Or how much is it still organized around the pursuit of the kind of success that keeps promising happiness and delivering something shorter? Success doesn't always make men happy, because success was built to solve the wrong problem. The wrong problem. It was built to establish worth, to prove capability, to earn a place. And it does all of that. But the problem of happiness is different. The problem of happiness is the problem of alignment, of a man being genuinely present in his life, of his days containing things he actually cares about, not things that demonstrate he has met the standard of his relationships with depth, not just function, of his sense of self resting on something internal, something that doesn't require the next achievement to remain intact. And the men who find their way to that, who figure out, usually in the second half of their lives, how to build around what actually produces happiness rather than what produces success. They don't necessarily have less. They just have more of the right things. More presence, more honest connection, more days that feel like they belonged to them, and less of the endless performance of a success that was supposed to make them happy and kept them missing the mark. I think the gap between success and happiness is one of the most honest things a man can notice about himself, because it tells the truth. It tells him that the model he's been running on is incomplete, that something important, something interior, hasn't been given the attention he needs. And that's not a verdict. That's an invitation. The life is still happening. The choices are still available. The version of himself that he could be genuinely, quietly happy. Not relieved, not proud, but actually at peace. Is not behind them. It's the next honest choice he makes. Let me know if this landed for you. If something here named what you've been carrying, share it with a man who might need to hear it. Leave a comment with those moments when you felt genuinely happy, not successful, happy. I read all the comments. And if you want to keep having conversations like this one, subscribe. This is what I do here, what I like to do with this channel. Slow, honest, worth doing. If you want to keep working with me, you will find the next video here, and I'll see you there.